Let's set the tone for the whole show today.
You blew it. You had it all and you blew it.
You had it all great again and you blew it.
Too Much Coffee, episode 25. I'm Jason. This is Kevin. Welcome to the show. We're glad to have you. Today, we're going to talk about SST Records. Probably something that you've never heard about, unless you're into punk rock music, unless you're into Black Flag, you know, maybe like some 80s hardcore, alternative music, stuff like that.
Some Dinosaur Jr., some Sonic Youth.
SST Records was a sort of alternate indie record label. Started by a guy named Greg Ginn, who was the guitarist and founding member of Black Flag. Black Flag, as you've probably heard of Black Flag. If you don't listen to punk or hardcore, you may not have listened to Black Flag, but it's like a legendary hardcore band. It's come back in different incarnations since then, but the heyday of Black Flag is, you know, the early to mid 80s. SST Records was a great incubator of hardcore music back in the day, and what we would call probably alternative music or college music. It was really a home for indie
80s,
rock,
90s.
college rock, that kind of music. Just interesting stuff like that, which was, you know, in the time that we live in now, you can find any music anywhere on YouTube or whatever. But, you know, back in the 80s, it was really difficult to find this stuff.
Yeah.
And you're not going to hear it on the radio. You're not going to hear Madonna and then Flock of Seagulls and then hear Black Flag, Husker and the Minutemen.
Unless you're close enough to like a college radio station or something like that.
Right. We're going to talk a little bit about this label, how it started, the rise of the label until the late 80s when they started putting out tons of records, selling lots of records. Some of the bands that were on the label and some of the classic records that were released. And then sort of the crash and fall of SST in the early 90s. And then we'll talk about the state of it now. I mean, it still exists, but it's a shell of what it once was.
Yeah, it's kind of a
80s.
Greg Ginn vanity / Black Flag merch store, basically.
SST is the brainchild of Greg Ginn. Now, let me tell you a little bit about who Greg Ginn is before we get into SST, because Greg Ginn and SST are two sides of the same coin. Okay, to learn about SST, you have to learn about Greg Ginn. Greg Ginn, he's a guy from California, Hermosa Beach. He was born in 1956. Yeah. He was one of these guys who, once he gets into something, and maybe you know people like this, but once he really gets into something, he really got into it. 100% full-on hardcore. That would define him throughout his whole life. Now, the first thing he got into is ham radio. And I guess you could think of it almost as, it's almost like social media of the 70s. Yeah. Where you had, you know, like CB radio with truckers. Yeah. They're all on the radio. Kinda they all have call signs. They all have names.
Pen pal.
Yeah, they all have names they call themselves, and they just talk to each other and whatever.
Yep.
He had a zine called The Novice where he was teaching people about ham radio. And then he started selling custom parts. Yeah. So he created a catalog that people could order from. This became his business and the business of all these people that he ran into in the early days.
When he started his band Black Flag, the first singer, Keith Morris, he talked about him and Greg used to solder parts together to sell it.
Eventually, he got turned on to guitar.
Yeah.
Somewhere around like 19 years old.
Yeah.
Like with everything else, he was into it 110%. So he was practicing for hours a day,
apparently still to this day, he just plays guitar for hours every day.
Yeah. And he started his first band called Panic.
Yeah.
He tried to get his brother to join, and his brother wasn't interested. He just wanted to make art. He wanted to make ugly artwork, as he does.
Oh, man. I love Raymond's art. I'll have to show you something in a little while here.
It's iconic, and it is the look of SST and Black Flag specifically, his artwork. But it is ugly. So Greg Ginn is, I would call him like an artistic type with an incredible work ethic.
Yeah.
He just has his own internal logic that is a mystery to everyone else. He's not concerned with making money. That will come up later. He's not concerned with being palatable to anyone else or to the masses. That will come up later. He is simply into what he's into, and that's it.
Which, hey, I understand. I also am just into what I'm into. and not particularly worried about who's going to, how many people are going to be into it.
And we're all into stuff.
Yeah.
I like things and I have hobbies.
Yeah.
But when I say he's into it,
yeah.
I mean he has jumped into the deep part of the pool, the 18-foot deep end of the pool. He is sinking to the bottom. He jumps all the way in.
Well, it's that on top of, and we'll get into some of this later, but he just has some like personality quirks, we'll say, that are a little destructive.
I mean, I started playing the guitar also about 18 years old. And I've practiced enough. We played in bands and I played quite a bit and practiced stuff. Never did I practice 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day. But when you read about someone like Greg Ginn or any other famous guitarist, Slash or Tom Morello, any of these famous guitar guys, when they got into it, that was all they did.
Yeah.
Greg Ginn formed Panic in 1976.
Yeah.
This is Hermosa Beach, California. He brought that same work ethic of playing the guitar into his band.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, in Keith Morris's book, we got a book called My Damage, which is also very good. Highly recommend. You can't not read it in his voice. But he mentions that like while they were working on the band and trying to play shows and stuff like that, not be able to get any. The real strong work ethic came in when like Chuck Dukowski joined the band.
Right.
And he was like, I'll join this band, but you have to take it more seriously. And I think that was when it really started to get into overdrive.
The early music of like Black Flag was inspired by stuff like the Ramones and the Stooges. So it's that sort of stripped down punk rock sound.
Yeah.
And they were in a place and in a time where it was difficult to get shows. And there wasn't much of a scene in the area.
Yeah, they're trying to get shows, which leads us into them trying to put out their first record in the beginnings of SST.
Right. That's how it all began. Yeah. So SST, we tell you this just to say SST all began with Greg Ginn starting a band and trying to find shows and trying to make a record. By the way, just by way of an interesting aside, Raymond Ginn, who is Greg Ginn's brother, who we know as Pettibon, based on a nickname that his dad had given him when he was a kid. He took it as his artist name. Greg tried to get him to play the bass in the band. Raymond was like, I'm not really into playing the bass. I just want to draw pictures all the time. So he's an artist and still makes art. And he's made art for his entire career. And as a matter of fact, has some level of fame. He does fine art shows. He's had some billboards, and stuff like that. So he's a pretty famous artist. And especially if you're into hardcore music, the look of Black Flag and early SST, that's Raymond Pettibon.
All the early stuff. And he's still scattered to this day. He did a Foo Fighters album cover in the 2000s.
So really,
all
his
the
brother,
albums.
His brother is as much a part of early SST as Greg is in a way because he is the aesthetic.
Well, for sure, Black Flag, the name and the logo and all those album covers, except for the very late stuff when they essentially cut ties with each other.
If you don't listen to Black Flag, you don't know, just Google it. But Black Flag's logo is 4 bars. Very simple, but iconic. That's Raymond Pettibon. The SST logo, that's Raymond Pettibon. All that crude artwork, all that crude, horrific artwork of terrible, awful things happening is Raymond Pettibon. You do wonder about the mind that creates this artwork. It's like, why did you decide to draw a nun wrapped around a guy's hairy leg?
Oh,
and why did Black Flag decide to use that when they have a female bassist in their band?
Yeah, it's like her first album with the band.
I'm looking. You know what my mouse pad is right now? It's the record version of Black Flag's The Process of Weeding Out. I'm looking at a picture of, I guess, the devil.
I have that on a shirt too.
This is a Raymond Pettibon drawing. The devil looking into a microscope, and he's looking at sperm swimming around.
Yeah.
Okay. Just go look up any Black Flag album cover, and you can see what Raymond Pettibon stuff is. It's effed up, but it is the aesthetic.
I love
SST.
Raymond Pettibon's art. It's not everybody's cup of tea, and it's fair enough.
No, you don't have to like it. But that it is a very identifiable aesthetic is what made SST stand out.
Yeah, and especially the early stuff, which, like you said, is pretty rough at times.
Yeah.
I guess as he got older, did different kinds of things. But in that early stuff, when you're a younger person, you're very edgy.
I understand it.
Stuff, yeah.
I understand
I was the same way when I was
because I'm an artist and I'm thinking about the stuff I used to draw when I was a kid. Demons.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. I understand.
Comic book stuff. People punching each other's lights out. I get it. Anyway, to get back to the story. So Greg Ginn is just trying to play shows and do a record, and he's finding that he can't make any progress. So he decides, you know what? If no one is going to help me, I'm just going to do it myself. He opens a phone book. He finds someone who presses records, and his business of selling ham radio, amateur radio parts, in his catalogs, that business was called SST.
Yeah.
Which stood for solid state transmitters.
Yep.
And he's like, well, I've already got the business set up and I've already got the name. I'll just use SST as the business name for, the records that I'm going to put out.
Yeah.
And that's how SST was born.
It was the groundwork, and he had the experience. And he was like, well, I can do this. And that's one thing I always kind of like to press on people. I love that he just like looked up a record pressing plant in the phone book. He's like, well, yeah, I can do that.
It's where the DIY spirit of a lot of early punk comes from. It's like these guys, people,
if you want to do something, you
families
can
didn't
just
like
do
this
it.
music.
Yeah.
The cops didn't like this music.
Yeah.
A lot of the people they had a hard time finding shows. The music was abrasive, obnoxious, and hostile. And they just had a hard time creating a scene. So they had to do a lot of the things themselves out of pure necessity.
They laid the groundwork, and they walked so later punk bands could run.
Thank you for that.
There you go. You're welcome.
Thank you for that.
Bands like them and a Minor Threat and stuff like that really laid the groundwork for future bands to tour on.
SST wouldn't have existed if Black Flag could have gotten some shows and someone else had given him a chance to put a record out. It started off as a vehicle for Black Flag to release material, and they had a very hard time even being able to record that. He just wanted to record that one full album.
Yeah.
The first thing that SST released was Black Flag's The Nervous Breakdown EP in January 1979.
Yep.
You know what? Let's set the tone of what this music sounded like. Let's check it out. Let's listen to something from The Nervous Breakdown. We can talk about the label and the music and blah, 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 and whatever. But to really get it and feel it, you need to listen to what the music sounded like.
Yeah.
So this is Black Flag, Nervous Breakdown. This is SST's first release.
I'm already in from that song. I'm already enthused. I'm pumped.
That's what Black Flag was doing.
Yeah.
Simple music. You heard that crunchy guitar.
Yeah.
Keith Morris singing. That is the kind of music that Black Flag was creating in the beginning. So due to just hard work, diligence, endless practicing, getting to know people, just through sheer willpower and hard work, Black Flag is finally starting to make a dent. Okay. Their first show was in 1979 in Redondo Beach. And slowly they are beginning to play more places. And slowly they're beginning to build an audience. There's a fan base for this music in the area.
Yeah.
You can see the attraction of it.
Yeah.
It's
great.
It's just catchy. It's fast.
Yeah.
It's simple. It's hard. It's like, it's just cool young person music.
I'm immediately into it. That's not even my favorite song off that EP.
What's your favorite song?
Fix Me.
Here's Kevin's favorite song.
1, 2, 3.
Someday I'll feel no pain. Someday I won't have a brain. They'll take away the part that hurts and let the rest remain. Fix my head. Fix me, please. I don't want to be dead. Someday, well, I'll be rich.
SST put out the Nervous Breakdown EP. They're touring. They're playing shows. Cops were getting interested in what they were doing, to use a euphemism.
Yeah.
And they were playing with other groups and getting to know other bands. And one of the bands they got to know was the Minutemen. They liked Black Flag, and they were having trouble releasing music. So they're like, talking again, like, hey, man, do you think you can help us out? He's like, yeah. Why not? I've already got the label. I've already done it once. I can help you do it too. And so they put out the Minutemen's debut EP, Paranoid Time. That is SST's second release in 1980.
Yep.
I want to listen to a little bit of this early music so we can just get a flavor of how it started.
And you get when you listen to this too, you get you heard Nervous Breakdown. You get a kind of a flavor just from these first two records of the trajectory of SST because they're very different.
Different than popular music of the time?
Well, they're different from each other. Like, I mean, they're both, noisy, aggressive music, but they're very different, when you listen to them.
This also used one of the things that made SST stand out was Raymond Pettibon's artwork.
Yeah.
Because the Minutemen used it as well.
Yeah.
And it gave SST like a branded appearance.
Yeah.
I'm a graphic designer by trade, so I have to work with companies sometimes on branding stuff. One thing that companies don't do is sometimes that their stuff is all sort of slapdash and they just do, put stuff together, not concerned about uniform look or fonts or colors, anything like that.
Yep.
But SST, because they worked with the same artist, everything had a cohesion. There was a cohesion of style across all the different bands that played, even though the music could be quite different. Okay, this is the Minutemen, Paranoid Time.
Steal the cue at GCC. Place lines this time. Make it heads worth the other, shorts worth the other. A conversation, a contradiction. When you make this sense, you got no position. And what you need is a validation. Go ahead, get my permission.
Now that is very different than what Black Flag's doing. I mean, you can feel that they're together in that it's alternative music. Yeah. And maybe that's the best way to think of all this music that they're putting out. It's all sort of alternative to popular radio music.
It has its vibe, but like that's sort of the history of SST is like they're putting out a lot of different records that don't necessarily have the same sound.
Right.
Because, this is very different from Saccharine Trust, which is very different from St. Vitus. And then later you have bands like Soundgarden, stuff like that.
Yeah, you mentioned Saccharine Trust.
Yeah.
Saccharine Trust is the third band that signs to SST. Let's listen to something. Their first record was called Pagan Icons.
Yeah.
We're not just going to be listening to music the whole time, but I just want to give you, we're going to listen to a little bit at the beginning here so you can get a sense of the kind of music that SST was built on. So this is Saccharine Trust, Pagan Icons. Different as well, but also that alternative vibe. But really, all this music does have something in common in that it is pretty catchy. If they're building on the foundation of the Ramones and the Stooges and stuff like that, especially the Ramones, it's going to be short, to the point, catchy music. The Ramones are considered the first punk rock group, if you just read like Wikipedia or something.
Well, that's what a lot of people say. They kind of codified what would become punk rock.
Yeah.
So is how I think of it, not really the first punk band.
Yeah. As usual, it's more, more complicated. Course, but if you think of the Ramones as like the fathers of punk,
they're the template,
quote punk.
Yeah.
Then that was their template.
Yeah.
Short, quick, no muss, no fuss, to the point, keep it catchy.
Which
that's
granted,
the foundation some of this music, this music was built on.
Yeah. Which granted, some of the other stuff on Pagan Icons is not quite like that. It's a little slower.
Yeah, but this stuff is also built on bands like Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
So it's like a mixture of slow, sludgy, heavy metal, but also quick, catchy punk. Yep. It's like a fusion of these different types of music.
Especially with Saccharine Trust, you have a lot of jazz influence.
And these bands were all just experimenting. I mean, these were kids, and they just all wanted to try stuff out.
Joe Baiza, very underrated guitarist, I think.
Yeah.
Great guitarist.
SST is playing, they're signing these bands. You get the Minutemen, you get Saccharine Trust, Overkill LA, the Meat Puppets,
Stains.
The Stains.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we could play so much music, but
I
we'll just stop it there. Which is
I'll make a playlist and have some weirder stuff in it.
Kevin said he's going to make a playlist, like a listening playlist. If you're really interested in the music we're talking about, he's going to make a playlist of stuff that you might be into or might be interesting to you. So 79 through 83, they're signing these foundational bands to the label. I mean, these bands stay with the label throughout the 80s. I would say a turning point, maybe you could say, would be when Husker Du signs with SST. Husker Du, they started making noise as a standout in the alternative music scene. All these bands, of course, were, popular in the scene.
Yeah.
That's why they ended up with record deals with SST. But Husker Du was a standout among standouts. And they just had a little something. If you were to go onto Wikipedia or something like that and read about them, they're going to tell you that Husker Du is almost a proto-alternative, like 90s version alternative music.
Well, yeah, they really started as like a hardcore punk band. You had like Land Speed Record, which is a very fast hardcore punk record.
Right.
But they just, as time went on, they got catchier and catchier.
They were a band who were never trying to milk their past work. They'd put a record out and they'd immediately start playing stuff for a new record, which makes Husker Du kind of interesting to listen to because they were just moving. They were always moving. And
plus, this gets in a little later with the troubles with SST, but by the time their record came out, they were already playing like the next record live.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the problems that starts to pop up early in SST is that the records are not being produced as quickly as the bands would like.
Yeah.
I guess it wasn't a deal killer at this point because a lot of these bands are with SST for years. And now some of it is probably cash flow.
Yeah,
they had no money early.
Part of the thing that makes Husker Du big for the label in general is that when Zen Arcade came out, it was big. Because before that, they didn't have any money and it took them a long time to put out records.
Right.
When Husker Du, Zen Arcade came out, that record sold a lot. And there's an interesting story where they only pressed 5,000 copies initially.
Oh,
and Husker Du
wasn't nearly enough.
Husker was like, this is going to sell more. We know this is going to sell more than this because Land Speed Records supposedly sold 10,000. So you can do at least that, but it sold out instantly.
Now think about the difficulties. Think about the difficulties of a record label trying to establish itself.
Yeah,
you have to have a distribution network. Now that becomes a problem for them later as well.
Yeah,
but they need money to record. They need bands that people want to listen to. They need to create demand for the records. They're doing all these things. And like you said, the distribution wasn't great.
Yeah.
It was difficult to get this music into record stores.
Yeah.
We're buying records right now. Now, CDs, I think, technically existed in 82, 80. A lot of this music, we're talking about cassettes. We're talking about records. Big, beautiful records.
Oh, yeah.
With the big, beautiful artwork inside. The big, beautiful pictures of Raymond Pettibon, of a kid defending himself from a teacher in the classroom. Or I'm trying to think about all the other horrific crap. Anyway.
Yeah.
Husker Du is a big important point for SST. They become a band that is generating a lot of buzz and therefore is generating a lot of sales for themselves, but also for the other bands. And Black Flag, of course, is also the foundation. Black Flag is the foundation for SST because Black Flag, people loved Black Flag.
Yeah.
And as they grow in popularity, the label also grows in popularity.
Yeah. And, there's a whole subject about Damaged in the, but, had they have probably gotten paid for Damage, that probably would have also helped pay for a lot of stuff in the label.
Legal issues, again, will also pop back up multiple times in the story of SST.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So sad.
There's a great I think it's Brian Walsby drawing where he did these indie, punk rock action figures in some of his comics. Brian Walsby is a comic artist and he grew up in Southern California. He draws comics about a lot of these early bands, and he has a great one of Greg Ginn where he's got a briefcase full of lawsuits. I wish I could find that. I tried to find that last time. You were over here.
Husker Du signs with SST in 1983. They put out Zen Arcade in 1984, which is kind of a game changer for the label.
Yes.
Zen Arcade is a classic record for the band, but also for alternative music in general. It becomes a classic. They also SST also puts out the Minutemen's Double Nickels on the Dime.
which is also
a classic record, as well as 4 Black Flag labels, because Black Flag had just gotten out of some legal trouble with Unicorn.
Yep.
They were not able to release their own music for a couple years.
Yeah.
Finally, they get out from under that legal trouble, and so they, I guess they just started pumping them out after that.
Yeah,
so '84 was the biggest year yet for SST.
Yeah,
they're putting out some pretty high, relatively speaking, high-profile music by some by bands that are on the rise. Black Flag is on the way up. Husker Du is on the way up. The Minutemen, this is probably the peak of the Minutemen's popularity, and this classic record they put out.
Well, they really weren't around much longer anyway, which that's once again another story, tragic story,
right? Let's listen to. Can we listen to a song from Zen Arcade?
Yeah, I would just play the first song. It's the famous one. It's the one most people know. Catchy song too.
This is Husker Du, 1984's Zen Arcade. This is the first track called Something I Learned Today. I think you can see the appeal.
Yeah.
It's something a little more sophisticated and complex than the early hardcore stuff, the early punk stuff. It's like, it's basically just the evolution of the genre.
Yeah.
The song is catchy. You hear how catchy it is from the get-go. This music, by the way, you have to know also about this music. These are bands who are just trying to make it. So they are recording on the cheap, quickly, with a guy who does a lot of this. So I mean, the engineer knows what he's doing because he's done so much of it. But man, this music is all quick, down dirty,
And one thing too that is kind of a sticking point for SST is that, especially the digital stuff, we're probably listening to a CD master from the 80s right now.
Mm-hmm.
And 80s CD digital technology was not good. It was, in some cases, it wasn't even. I mean, the CD format itself is 16-bit, 44 to 1 kilohertz.
Right.
But in some cases, it may have not even been 16-bit. It could have been like 14 or 12-bit or something like that.
Yeah.
They didn't really have proper metering.
Film, folks. Listen, tape.
Yeah.
Tape.
Yeah.
You've seen old movies, tape.
Yeah.
Where if you want to, if I'm editing this podcast, I just have to hit the little razor blade button, clip. Then I click the other button, whoop. Move it over and then just slide them back together. No.
Which, tape and analog formats are excellent, but the digital formats were not so great. Mm-hmm. And all this stuff could really use a remaster. Yeah. For the digital formats, especially.
And again, another topic that will pop back up in the history of SST. Oh, it's so tragic.
At the end, yeah.
Let's listen to a track from Double Nickels on the Dime.
Came out same day, which was really, I think, SST's doing. I think the famous song, This Ain't No Picnic or Corona. Corona, famously the Jackass theme song.
That's right. You may have heard the Minutemen. You didn't even realize it. The Jackass theme song is a Minutemen song.
Cheers is a heart attack. Makes you feel this way.
Listen to that bass.
Oh,
it's so
great.
cool.
Yeah. Also, funny aside, the title "Double Nickels a Dime" is them kind of making fun of Sammy Hagar a little bit because he had that song, "I Can't Drive 55." Like, well, that's not rebellion. So double nickels on a dime. They're driving exactly 55 miles. In that photo, they're driving exactly 55 miles an hour.
Yeah, the photo on the record is him smiling driving.
Yeah, they're driving
55 miles an hour.
Exactly 55 miles an hour on the 10. Yeah. So it's double nickels on the dime. The 10, of course, is a freeway in LA.
If you want to get into some of this music, we're playing some of this music because we think you might be interested and you've probably never heard it before. So if you hear anything in this episode that sounds cool, go check it out.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, you
for
can
sure.
find any of this stuff on YouTube. 1984 is also the year, in my humble opinion. I mean, of course, these things don't happen all of a sudden, but 1984 is also the year where Black Flag publicly announces to its fan base, we no longer care if you enjoy our music or not. They release Family Man, which is half instrumental. This is
Very experimental record for
this
them.
is the beginning of the downfall of both Black Flag and SST as a record label. Greg Ginn, who likes what he likes, regardless of what other people think about it,
Yeah.
is getting into instrumental music that nobody likes except for him
Well, that's-
and 15
that's not
other
true.
people.
That's not true. It does have a smaller audience. But
Yes, a fraction of a fraction will enjoy this music, which is fine. It's
Yeah.
just that you are running a record label and it's a problem. But let's play a
Well, in
Cats.
all fairness, it's not like everything on the record label was instrumental. He had lots of big hits, or relatively large hits.
This is the seed that is planted.
Yeah,
It will sprout in 1990 or 91 or 92 or 89 or whatever at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s. Let's play something that sucks ass from Family Man. No, I'm just messing around. I'm still in my
You're in
Spider-Man
rant
move. I know.
play Account for What. That's a good song.
Count for what?
Yeah.
All right, this is from Family Man. So you see what Black Flag was turning into.
Yeah.
We had listened to Nervous Breakdown earlier. Quick, to the point,
Yeah.
catchy, designed to be... it's designed so the group full of people who possibly hate you and want to throw things at you and spit on you will start pumping those fists and start saying, yeah, Nervous Breakdown, my head really hurt. And they start slam dancing in the middle of the pit. This is where the people are like, wait a second.
Yeah,
Don't throw this beer in the trash. Hit Greg Ginn in the head with it.
well, the
Stop that.
the later Black Flag stuff is less immediate. Doesn't have quite the same,
By the way, the cover of Family Man
Oh yeah.
is graced with a beautiful, heartwarming picture of a
Of course.
family. The daughter has been shot in the arm. It looks like the son is lying dead with a bullet wound in his head, and the father is about to put one in his own head. This is why
Black Flag, baby.
This is why the head of Unicorn had a problem putting out Black Flag material. It's like, well, is this family friendly? This is exactly the opposite of family friendly.
I mean,
right here, my friend.
I get what you're saying, but in all fairness, that album cover is way past that. There wasn't really anything particularly
No. Oh yeah, no. This is to
objectionable
the
in the early
next
stuff.
level.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, even Nervous Breakdown had a kid defending himself from a teacher who was attacking him with
Yeah.
a chair, right?
Yeah, but it was like
So
not quite on the same level.
I like the idea of walking through Kmart and you're like, oh, this looks cool. This guy's about to shoot.
Kmart.
He's just shot his whole family. He's about to shoot himself in the head.
On the day of the JFK assassination, too.
Oof. Oh my God.
That's what the date on there is.
1986. Let's fast forward a couple years. SST is still on the rise. 86 through 89 are the best years of SST. So all of the early years, all the early 80s we're building, we're signing bands, and these bands are touring like crazy.
Yep.
And they're putting out records and they're building a fan base, and they were talented anyway. So it's all paying dividends. We got Zen Arcade, we got Double Nickels on the Dime, we got My War from Black Flag live in 84. We're getting more Meat Puppets records, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now in 86, we're getting Sonic Youth. You've probably heard of Sonic Youth.
Oh, yeah.
Huge band, and was huge for SST. And the Bad Brains, which was a huge band. You may not have heard of Bad Brains unless you're sort of into punk rock and alternative, 80s music. But the Bad Brains were a big deal back then. And it was huge for SST to get the Bad Brains. So Sonic Youth, they're an interesting band. They, like Husker do, they were always doing the next thing. They weren't just playing the hits, from their last record.
Yeah.
They would record, they would work out songs on the road, put a record out, and then the shows after that, they're working out songs for the next record. And they were interested in noise and in sound.
Yeah.
They were they'd mess around with this type of guitar or this type of tuning, or they'd get into, tube amps, and they just were experimental in that way.
Yeah, very interesting way of channeling a lot of their sort of early punk no wave and the more artier, like experimental music into like fairly catchy, like songs, basically.
Mm-hmm. Plus, Thurston Moore was 14 feet tall, so he really stood out on stage.
Yeah.
Thurston Moore is the lead singer of Sonic Youth, if you don't know. So Sonic Youth loved what SST was doing.
Oh, yeah.
And they were very excited when they finally got a chance to join SST. This is from their first LP from 1986 called Evil, EVOL. This is called Tom Violence.
It's a good song.
I mean, you can see the appeal of Sonic Youth.
Yeah.
Listen to the sound that they're creating. Anyway, Sonic Youth is an interesting band. They're making interesting music, and they were on the way up. Daydream Nation was their number one big release.
Which granted, that's after SST.
Yes, but what I mean is,
I know what you mean.
They're up and coming.
Yeah.
They're up and coming on SST. Daydream Nation would come out in 1988. This is 1986. So they're moving into their greatest popularity ever. The Bad Brains, who had already had a rough time. If you want to read about an interesting band, I get more specifically an interesting person. Read about the Bad Brains.
That HR.
And HR. Whew, interesting fella.
For sure.
Let's play a little cut from Eye Against Eye.
In a quest for the test, it's a feeling achievement. Everybody's always on it just to see himself. With a fucking mouth that you just don't fit. Understand I open empty anyone else. So you tell me why did you have to lie? Trying to make me up confused about the USA. When the fuck in my mind that you just don't hear. To comprehend or understand a single word I say. Mother, whatever, go get tired.
That one sounds more punk rock, but they were this fusion of heavy metal. Dr. No could really play.
Yeah.
He could shred.
Yeah.
And HR, interesting frontman to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
A trouble magnet. If you're interested in him, look up the history of Bad Brains and specifically HR.
Yeah.
But Bad Brains were hugely popular. Their shows were intense and energetic. People loved them. People came out to see them.
Energetic, play a lot of punk, and also kind of alternate between punk and reggae songs.
And they love, Bad Brains love to burn bridges, including with major labels. So they ended up on SST, and SST sold a lot of records through Bad Brains.
And HR specifically put out a lot of records on SST, actually.
This is the year also that Joe Carducci leaves. Now, SST is a 4-man partnership. We told you it started out with Greg Ginn. So in the early days, he's getting a lot of sort of volunteer help.
Yeah.
He would get the people of Black Flag would help out, or people would sort of drift in. People in their orbit who loved what SST was doing, who loved the music. That's probably part of why SST was so awesome. In the beginning, you couldn't have gotten into it for the money because there was no money.
Yeah.
So people who loved the music and were into the scene were just absorbed into SST. Joe Carducci joins SST because he loves what Black Flag is doing. And he had been working at a label before, and he was like, I love Black Flag and I love this music, so bring me over to SST because I just want to see what we can do.
Yeah.
And he's an excellent addition to the label for years. Mugger, whose band Beep Beep was a very offensive band that Black Flag took on tour sometimes.
Which interestingly didn't release anything on SST. It was on other labels.
That's probably a great idea.
Yeah, probably true.
Mugger started out as just this guy, young guy. He might have still been in high school when he was first volunteering. But
his real name is Steve Corbin. He was kind of from a shitty home, so he like ran away. Basically, he was homeless for a long time.
Took in with got into the punk rock scene. Took in with the guys from SST and just started working. Around the office and becomes a full partner of SST. Yeah,
he becomes a partner. He does accounting. He has like he eventually gets an economics degree from UCLA.
Right, and that's when he leaves after he finishes his degree, and maybe for other reasons too. But after he finishes his degree, he leaves SST as well.
Yeah, well, he's an interesting story in himself. He's kind of a rags to riches story. He's like a millionaire nowadays.
He obviously is a hard worker and an interesting guy.
Yeah.
And he loved offensive music, as we said.
Well, yeah.
86, 87, 88, 89 were the biggest years for SST. Everything so far has been building up to these years.
Kind of looking at it a little bit.
And then tragedy begins to hit. So Joe Carducci leaves. That sucks. Mugger leaves. That sucks.
Yep.
Dukowski, who was a bass player for Black Flag, but also a integral part of SST from the beginning.
Yeah, he was for sure a big
who was
part of Black
who
Flag.
was the fourth partner.
Yeah,
sold his part of the company to Greg in 1989. So in the span of just a few years, they lose their core members.
Yep,
and that changes the entire company.
And one thing to mention about that too is that like, in order to sign a band to SST, it had to be like in complete agreement. Because that's why some bands didn't get signed. Famously, I guess it's a little bit later, but
all four partners had to agree. Right.
Yeah, because they almost signed Nirvana, but I think Greg just didn't want to do it for some reason. He just didn't like Nirvana, I guess, at the time.
Yeah.
This would have been pre-Bleach. So,
right.
Yeah.
An early Nirvana. Oh my God. Could you imagine if he owned the rights to that first Nirvana album?
He wouldn't own him now, that's for sure.
That's true. Black Flag breaks up in 86. I guess to be more exact, Greg Ginn tells Henry Rollins, "I'm leaving the band,"
he just quits
which basically means, the band's over.
He wasn't really interested anymore and was wanting to do other things.
He leaves Black Flag and he's more interested in his side projects like Gone, his other band, and more instrumental stuff. Around this time, the money is pouring in because of these big hits from Sonic Youth and Bad Brains and Husker Du and all this music they've collected. The money is starting to come in.
Like 86
they're
to
starting
89,
to make some
they're putting
serious
out
money.
tons of records.
They're signing tons of bands. They put out something like 80 releases in 1986 alone, which may not mean, you hear that number like, 80. Is that a lot? Is that not? It's more than any other major label had put out in a year. So this little indie label is putting out more records than, I don't know, Warner Brothers and CBS and Island Records.
And some
whoever.
bands that are big that would, especially go on to be big, like Dinosaur Jr. and stuff like that.
Yeah. It may have been a mistake that they were signing so many bands. Maybe the quality control was dropping down a little bit.
Well, I don't know if it's quality control exactly. It's probably just more than they could handle, really.
Well, the more that you spread yourself out, the less effort you can put into any one individual band.
Yeah.
Sonic Youth was getting upset with SST, not only because they felt like they weren't being paid what they were owed, but also because now that all this money was coming in, and a lot of the money they were making was because of Sonic Youth and other bands like Sonic Youth, just like a handful of the biggest acts were bringing in all the money. They were taking that money, and Sonic Youth's complaint was they're not spending it on us as much as they ought to when we're the ones bringing in the bulk of the money. They're spending it on all these other acts who aren't making money.
Yeah.
That problem of not paying bands was compounded when Mugger left. He was the accountant.
Yeah.
There were some irregularities with the money before that, but apparently after he left, it really turned into a problem where bands were not getting paid what they were owed, which is ironic since Greg Ginn had problems with other people for the same reason, like Unicorn. One of the big problems with Unicorn is that Black Flag released Damaged, and they're not getting the money.
Yeah, they sold
from Unicorn.
25,000 copies and didn't get any of the money, basically.
And as soon as he asks about where's the money, Unicorn, where's the money, Lebowski?
Yeah,
as soon
yeah.
as he starts asking about it, they slap him with a lawsuit. Well,
Yeah.
this is coming back coming back to him later. His band's like, where's the money?
Daniel Spector, who's a guy who comes in later in SST after all the people leave, points out that the early contracts aren't really like done properly.
SST
Yeah.
was a very laid back operation, even when they had 40 employees,
Yeah.
even when they had, open an extra office in New York.
Yeah,
It was always laid back. They they famously would take a 4:00 weed break. You could go out in the parking lot and smoke one,
Which is
get the creative
excellent. I mean,
juices flowing.
yeah.
Very laid back corporate structure.
I don't
When
smoke weed, but I love that. That's great.
When they brought Daniel Spector in and they were doing his interview, he came in with a full suit and tie.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said Daniel Spector was talking to Dukowski and Ginn, who were interviewing him, and they said, "Did you tie that yourself?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Wow, you would be the only person here who knows how to do that."
Yeah, yeah.
That tells you the type of corporate structure that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Which is fine, but you really have to have your while you're accounting, especially when you're dealing with people's money and stuff like that.
That was the
Especially
problem.
with these bands, a lot of these bands aren't huge bands, so them not getting paid is, the difference between them eating or not.
The bands with management, they were the ones who got paid.
Yeah,
Soundgarden got paid.
Yeah.
And we haven't gotten into Soundgarden yet, but Soundgarden got their money. And the guy, Thuyel from Soundgarden said, we got paid. We had no problem with it. But guess what? They were big and they had management. You didn't want to mess with a group like that because they're going to get their money. Cash flow was an issue, especially when it came to certain bands getting more attention than others.
Yep.
And a lot of the bands didn't feel taken care of. They didn't, it seems like, probably didn't even really take care of their master recordings.
That's a possibility.
Unknown.
We don't know.
It's unknown exactly the state of some of these recordings, but it's theorized. We read this book by Jim Ruland called Corporate Rock Still Sucks.
Yeah.
It talks all about SST records. And at the end of the book, he discusses one possibility for why some of this music is not being released. And I'm sorry, I'm moving ahead a little bit. We'll get back into this later. But one of the reasons some of this music is possibly not been re-released, besides Greg Ginn's, quirky weirdo personality, is that the masters are possibly were not stored properly and are basically destroyed. They had a problem because when they were re-releasing Live in '84, Black Flag's recording, the engineer at the time had to go in and do extensive work just to make it releasable because the tapes were not in good shape. If they didn't take care of Black Flag's master recording, what are they going to do with everybody else's? You think they're putting them in a hermetically sealed, climate controlled vault? Hell no. They just threw them in some closet somewhere, probably the leak. Probably didn't have an air conditioner
all
in that
those
closet.
records that are just sitting in a closet somewhere.
Mice are shitting all over the records
maybe.
and moths are flying out of the boxes.
Yeah.
There's
Who
a
knows?
leak in the ceiling. Yeah, I can't even imagine. So those recordings may even be freaking gone. Who knows? Their core staff is leaving, which means the entire atmosphere is changing because it's becoming the Greg Ginn show. And as we said before, what used to require 4 people's agreement now requires one person's agreement. We got one guy at the top. And he is unconcerned with a lot of the day. I don't want to overstate it.
Yeah.
But he has his own priorities.
For sure.
Which are not necessarily aligned with the interests of all the acts on the label at all times.
Yeah.
Let's get into 1988 before we get to the end here where Greg Ginn is the guy calling all the shots. Let's talk about 1988. This is a band called Negative Land. You have not heard of Negative Land. Unless you are really into this stuff, you've not heard of them. Negative Land with no E.
Admittedly, a band I find fascinating and I've listened to some, but I need to really get into because they're fascinating as shit.
You could probably best think of them as an art rock band.
They're really not like a band in the traditional sense. They definitely have like an intent and a message that isn't just like making music. They're trying to say something.
They're provocateurs. They're noisemakers. They are an art
a lot of
project
sampling
almost
and collage and
more
stuff
than
like that,
a strict band. They didn't even tour.
Yeah.
And for some reason, their debut album, which was released in '88 on SST, was a surprise hit. It sold like 35,000 copies. So all this money came from SST for a Negative Land. out of nowhere. It's like, how in the world did this happen? Who knows? These guys were just incredible at making noise, at just getting attention.
Yeah.
Apparently. Well, they got a lot of attention in 1991.
Oh, yeah.
Before we get into that, 1988 is also the year. Now, Soundgarden was basically, Soundgarden, they were destined to be superstars from day one.
Yeah.
It seems like. Even early on, Soundgarden comes out of the Seattle scene. We all know what came out of Seattle. The grunge scene, Nirvana, Seattle, Soundgarden, music like that. Major labels were sniffing around for them from the earliest days.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, they could have gotten a major label release. They could have signed with a major label before they signed to SST.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And it's possible that one of the reasons they signed with SST, it seems like at least the guitarist of the band, but maybe the whole band, they were fairly savvy.
Yeah.
They had management. They were savvy. They read their contracts, and they knew how to take care of themselves. And they thought they'd be in a better negotiating position with a major label if they could build up a little more popularity with SST on their own first.
Like you said, some leverage.
Yeah, leverage.
They hadn't even toured when they when they were getting major label.
Incredible.
Tours.
Some bands are just destined for greatness, and they were. They released their first record on SST called Ultra Mega OK. Let's listen to a little hit of this.
Which I have
We
to
all
admit,
know-
I have never listened to.
We all know Soundgarden's Super Unknown. This is Flower from Ultra Mega OK. You can hear it.
Yep.
I mean, yeah.
Yep.
Obviously. They're going to be huge. And Chris Cornell obviously is an incredible singer. People just love Chris Cornell, and the major labels love
Look into
Chris
those
Cornell.
eyes.
Hey, just go look at pictures of Chris Cornell from 1980s where he had his shirt off all the time, his
Yeah.
long, luscious, wavy hair. So SST had Soundgarden's first album.
Yep.
Which was incredible for them. They also have, just to name a few other bands, which were pretty big. They had Dinosaur Jr. They had Screaming Trees, which you may have heard of. HR, who's the lead singer of Bad Brains, solo stuff.
Tons of stuff. Post Minutemen.
Fire Hose.
Yeah, Fire Hose. That's what I was going to mention.
The Descendants. SST had bought New Alliance Records.
Yep.
And so they had the Descendants albums, which they released. So this is the heyday of SST, the height of their power, the height of their cash flow, the height of their popularity. But it's also when the wheels come off and all of the problems that they had as a smaller label are just compounded when they become a big label. And this is when it falls apart. So their core staff leaves, the very nature of the label changes because they don't have those people. They start bringing in new people to fill the holes left by the old guard that were leaving. Yeah. And these new people were just working. Yeah. This is just a job.
Well, yeah, it went from being an organic formation of people who are in the same scene and have the similar interests, and so don't mind the more laid back nature to people who aren't in it. You're bringing it from the outside. And when you're at this level, it really is like a business. You need to take it, more seriously when you're dealing with other people's music.
They weren't able to pivot into a bigger label.
Yeah.
I'm going to say 1991 because that's when this Negative Land lawsuit.
Yeah.
This was the last great terrible decision of Greg Ginn as the leader of SST.
Man, I love that story.
We could do a whole podcast about this story. So, of all the people who knew better than to get into some sort of legal stupidity,
or you would think,
Greg Ginn, Negative Land, who had that breakout out of nowhere hit 35,000 copies, which might not sound like much to you, but for a alternative, small label, kind of college rock label in the 80s from a band that didn't tour and wasn't even really a band, to just sell that much from their first release. It's like, what happened?
Hey, 35,000 copies is
happening?
respectable for sure.
I'd love to sell 35,000 copies of something.
Of anything.
In 1991, they got a recording of Casey Kasem, the voice of the hippie from Scooby-Doo, Shaggy. Casey Kasem, the beloved radio disc jockey. They got a hold of a recording of him, shitting on U2 a little bit.
Yeah.
U2 was the biggest band, one of the biggest bands on the planet.
Well, even more than that, it's just, Casey Kasem's image before this was just wholesome. He was like America's dad.
Yeah. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, this is so good. We have to use this. So
I don't blame him. It's
the
so
whole
good.
impetus. So the whole impetus for this thing is this Casey Kasem recording where he's talking about U2 and sort of trashing him a little bit. Yeah. It was actually, when you listen to the recording, there's really not much to it.
Well, yeah, most of it is actually not about U2.
But,
these guys are from England and who gives a shit?
Exactly. So they've got this recording of Casey Kasem, like, we got to do something with this. And they decide to make this record called U2. They splice up the recording and they use this almost like this Nintendo MIDI sound of a U2 song in the background.
Yeah. I love this song, actually. I kind of wish I just had an instrumental version of it. I love the version with Casey Kasem too. But
what they made was lawsuit bait.
Yeah.
So they create this song, and then the album itself looks like a YouTube album that's called Negative Land. Because the U2 is gigantic and Negative Land is in tiny little letters in the corner. But actually, it was a Negative Land album called U2. So they take this thing to Greg. Daniel Spector says, this is interesting. I love it. We cannot release this.
Yeah, I love it.
We will be sued into oblivion. U2 will sue us. Casey Kasem will sue us. Island Records will sue us. We cannot put this record out. Guess what? Greg Ginn says, we're putting it out.
Daniel Spector quits immediately.
Daniel Spector says, it's not worth it. I know exactly what's going to happen. I am out of here. You're right.
Yeah.
Smartest thing he could have done. That's the smartest decision he ever made his whole life. Daniel Spector leaves immediately, which was also a shame because he was great. Daniel Spector really tried to whip them into shape.
Yeah.
And Greg Ginn was just not having it. SST puts this thing out. They immediately get letters from, 3 or 4 letters saying, stop right now, and we're going to sue you. And it turns into a whole, we're not going to take you through all of the ins and outs. This is a fascinating story. You can read about it online if you want to. U2,
once again,
Negative Land,
this could
SST.
be a whole episode.
It's a whole saga, but basically what happened was SST got sued. Negative Land got sued. The Negative Land was trying to argue about copyright, fair use. They're like, look, it's fine. We should be able to do this. It's fine.
Which U2, I agree with, but it's just,
U2's management was pissed. They're like, you can't do this. It's going to make people think this is a U2 record.
Yeah.
Like, God, shut up. It's so lame. But
which, in all fairness, I'm sure Negative Land was probably like, I imagine they were aware that they were going to face consequences for it. But I feel like Greg just has a thing in his head where he's like, oh, it'll be fine. It's cool.
It'll be fine.
He doesn't even think about it. It's just like, oh shit, why am I getting sued?
They end up with a deal. Now, SST was already kind of looking bad to its artist, but then SST did not fully have Negative Land's back. You would think they would have.
Yeah.
Because they're like, dude, let's put it out.
Yeah.
Well, when the chips were down, SST showed that they did not have Negative Land's back 100%. I mean, one of the problems was U2 was gigantic.
Oh, yeah.
At the time. U2, the Joshua Tree was the first CD to sell over 1 million copies. The album itself had sold over 25 million copies.
Yeah.
But it was the first CD to sell over 1 million copies. Anyway.
I mean, the sound recording thing. I mean, it's a cover song. You can cover songs all you want. I think the thing about the cover of the album being deceptive is kind of fair.
It sounds lame as hell. It is deceptive. It was supposed to be, and it was. Absolutely. It looks like a U2 record, but it just sounds so lame. They're going to think this is a U2 record. Well, I don't know.
Well, they'll know.
They would. Yeah.
They'll know immediately when they play it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That it's not U2.
Probably if you just turn it around and look at the back. I don't know what the back of the record looks like, but I bet you could figure it out pretty quickly.
Look it up real quick.
So U2's label wanted SST to recall all copies of the record, turn over all the inventory, all the masters, the promotional packaging, and for all that stuff to be destroyed. They were also going after SST for copyright violations, blah blah blah, stuff like that, and they wanted SST to to put out basically a press release and trade publications to say, hey, we messed up. We shouldn't have done it. It was wrong. SST, see, this sucked. SST sent Negative Land a one-page agreement stating that SST had no responsibility in this matter.
Yeah, just complete.
And wanted Negative Land to sign it.
Complete cowards.
Now think about this. Think about how lame this is.
Yeah.
You imagine that your label has your back because they're willing to put out your record knowing that it's a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And Negative's Land's entire existence is to be a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
They want to draw controversy. That's what they tried to do.
Yeah. They had an intent, and they were aware of
and
what
as
could
soon
happen.
as they put it out, as soon as they start getting legal notices, SST's like, oh, would you please sign this piece of paper saying that we have nothing to do with your legal crap?
Absurd.
And Negative Land was rightly alarmed by this and refused to sign it.
Yeah, I don't blame them at all.
They wanted both. They did agree to split costs.
Yeah,
like legal costs with the label. And even when it came down to how much did it cost, SST was saying that the legal fees were probably about $90,000.
Yeah,
but they could only account for something like $41,000 in legal fees, I guess, through paperwork.
Yeah,
were they lying about that?
Who knows?
Stretching the truth by $50,000.
It could be.
They actually came up with an agreement with Negative Land, where Negative Land ended up having to pay the bulk of the legal fees. They ended up paying something like $30,000 out of that $41,000, which could be accounted for.
Yeah.
So it was just another example of SST looking bad. I mean, they had actually had trouble with their own. They sued the Meat Puppets for libel.
Yeah.
After the Meat Puppets had said something that wasn't nice about SST. This is Greg Ginn. He just does that stuff like this. He sends letters. He gets the law involved. He sues people.
And that's what's funny about SST. They had the sticker in the shirts that say "Corporate Rock Sucks," but they're doing the same shit.
And that's why his partner's leaving was the worst thing that could possibly happen to SST, because Greg Ginn needs a check. Against himself.
For sure.
His personality is not conducive to running a music label. So, I'm going to say 1991. I'm just calling that the end of SST proper,
They still put out some good records in the 90s, but it's a trickle compared to what was earlier.
In the 90s, SST basically becomes, they're doing a lot of re-releases of old materials and compilation records and stuff like that, but they're also doing a lot of Greg Ginn's projects.
Yep.
This is like some sort of jazz fusion instrumental music. Every project has a different flavor.
And once again, where
as a matter of fact, let's play a little something. Let's play a 90s project.
Go for it.
From Greg Ginn from SST.
And kind of like, like you're saying, Greg needs a check. It's the same thing as music, I think, too. I love Greg Ginn's guitar playing. He's my favorite guitarist, but he doesn't really have great taste. And his post Black Flag stuff, I haven't listened to a lot of it. Some of it's great, but it's the earlier stuff like Gone, when he still had a good band playing with him.
Well, let's listen to
the really good
let's
stuff.
listen to a Gone release from 94. This 94. Is The Criminal Mind.
We'll see.
instrumental, no vocals.
Yeah.
And
You also got to compare that to like some of the earlier Gone stuff. But yeah, some of his like earlier stuff, he had other people checking him. The earlier Black Flag stuff, he had like Chuck Dukowski, and there's this sort of idea that Black Flag was all him, but it really wasn't. Even like the later stuff in my head, I could go get it right now. A lot of the writing credits are not Greg Ginn. It's like, it might be Ginn, but also is like Kira and Henry and stuff like that.
all right, here's another little something. This is from 1996, Greg Ginn. This is Slow and Sleazy by HOR, Whore. So you see what's happening here. Greg is getting into this stuff. That's what he's spending all of his time working on. He had built a really nice studio for himself.
Yeah.
Where he got an early, Pro Tools set up in the 90s. And he was getting into drum sequencing.
Yeah.
He actually had said at one point, according to somebody, if he could get rid of all band members, he would and just do it himself.
Yeah.
He just wanted to pursue exactly what he wanted to pursue.
I like
What's
in
funny,
Keith Morris's book, he talks about the early 2000s when they're trying to get Black Flag, I'm doing quote fingers, back together.
Yeah.
He hadn't seen Greg in forever, so he goes to the SST office and he's like, oh, this place is like huge. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And like, it was this big. He had like his own music venue and like a coffee shop or some shit in it. Yeah.
And in a way, to praise, a lot of bands loved working with SST because they would not bother you at all. They would let you do what you wanted to do.
Yep.
They would not bother you about the artwork on your record.
Yes.
They'd let you have basically total creative control.
Yeah, and that's really as a positive because there's there's all kinds of bands out there. Not all of them are going to get put out on like major labels and stuff like that. Sometimes you have a limited audience, but it doesn't matter to SST. They would just put your stuff out.
So it was a great incubator for that sort of type of music because they wouldn't bug you.
Yeah.
But then they also wouldn't pay you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's not great.
We did briefly mention that someone had brought Greg Ginn Nirvana and said, dude, you need to sign these guys. He said, nah.
Yeah.
And not just once, several times this guy said, you need to think about signing these fellas. And he's like, I'm just not into it.
Which of course,
wrong.
This is, pre-Bleach Nirvana. Nobody knew they were going to be huge, of course. I mean, I'm sure somebody did, but
that guy did, apparently. Greg didn't. Boy, did he mess up. Woo, I'd love to own the rights to that first Nirvana record. All the best bands have left. You are left with small bands that, no offense, but small bands that are not as important culturally. Yeah. And the music has shifted over to, it's all grunge rock, or grunge music and alternative rock.
Yeah.
Radio rock, that kind of stuff. I told you, previously, that's what SST messed up on. They should have signed Three Doors Down. And,
Three Doors Down.
Who are they getting? Live.
Yeah.
All that stuff. They should have shifted into that alternative music in the early 90s. Yeah, just follow the trends. Then you start signing boy bands. Get Boys to Men.
There you go.
Get the Backstreet Boys. Get NSYNC.
Now we're talking.
Then you get into new metal. Get Korn. Get Breaking Benjamin.
What a trajectory that would be.
They just ride every single trend. SST becomes the
whatever's
juggernaut.
big, they're just like, well, yeah. I can hear Greg signing.
Then get into the dance pop, the 2000s.
Guys, you want to sign with SST?
Listen, Ariana Grande, we really like what you're doing. We'd like you to come over to SST and put out your record.
Sound like Nicolas Cage.
Chad Kroger, listen, I really love what Nickelback is doing. I'd love to bring you over to SST and put out your record right now. I think you guys are incredible.
Nickelback.
And that's it. That's the story of SST. It's over. It was great. SST still exists today.
Yes.
They have the SST Superstore.
I'm looking at it right now.
You can go online, check out the SST Superstore.
Yeah. I mean, all the
You can go to SSTSuperstore.com right now and see the gigantic classic SST logo, which is a little blurry. They should have uploaded a better quality version of the logo, but you can go buy some Bad Brains and Black Flag, some classic stuff. There's a lot of stuff on here that's Greg Ginn's music. But there's also a lot of stuff missing that people would like to hear.
And that's
Greg owns it. He can do whatever he wants to with it. He's decided he does not want to re-release some of this classic music for whatever reason. And actually, if you speak to some of the people who worked at SST, they'll tell you a lot of those early contracts were not great. If you fought it in court, you might could get the rights to that music.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not an expert on what all those bands have done. I mean, a lot of them have broken up.
For sure.
So there may be no one to fight for the music.
And they're not all huge bands, but they still have an audience. They're still a band that existed at some point, and it sucks that they're,
it's a shame to lose anything.
Even if you're not going to like actually release it, have the rights, and you can just put it on Bandcamp for whoever's interested.
Right.
Put it on the streaming services.
Yeah. So, Greg Ginn's out in Texas now. He moved.
Yeah.
He moved to SST to Texas.
Taylor, Texas.
Some small town in Texas. But he just kind of is doing whatever he's doing. He doesn't really do interviews much anymore. He's retired from doing interviews, according to him.
He's coasting, basically.
He's 57 years old, living in Texas, doing whatever he wants to do. I'm sure he's making plenty of money through the music that he owns, I guess.
Oh, he definitely is. Well, it's the music and also the merch. Look at how much Black Flag merch is on there.
I don't know how much money there is in Black Flag, Husker Du, Minutemen, et cetera, releases, but he owns it. So if you want it, you got to go to him to buy it.
Yeah.
And so I guess he's got the money coming in from this stuff. So basically, SST is a weird story of a indie label that became a lot bigger than anyone expected.
Yeah.
And a lot of great music came through there.
Yeah.
We've tried to play some representative samples of the music of SST throughout this episode.
Yeah, some of the bigger
we could
stuff.
We could have played you 1,000 other songs.
Oh, yeah.
There are tons of bands. They all have their own flavor, and there was a lot of talent. If anything that you've heard interests you, we live in the era of YouTube.
Yes,
absolutely. You can find anything on YouTube. It'll take you 2 seconds to type it in and check it out. Go listen to some Black Flag. Go listen to some Saccharine Trust. Go listen to some Meat Puppets.
Go listen to some Jam Band.
Go listen to the early Sonic Youth. Go listen to the earliest Soundgarden.
Yeah.
Go listen to Zen Arcade by Husker Du. Just check it out and see what you think, if you have any interest in this material. If not, I hope it was interesting to you to listen to, the story of a whole scene and a record label that maybe you've never heard of, but was actually a hugely important part of music for a lot of people.
Yes.
In a lot of places. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button because that helps us a lot. Comment if you're checking this out on YouTube. Follow the show. Rate the show. Any engagement is important to help the show grow. We appreciate you. Next week, we're going to be talking about a classic game called Fallout 2.
I got to finish it.
Now, a lot of people have played Fallout 3, 4, New Vegas, whatever. Have a lot of people played Fallout 76? I don't know.
I think so.
But
I think
surprisingly, a lot of, quote, Fallout fans have never played the first two. We've already talked about the first one. If you're interested, go back and check out the Fallout 1 episode. But next week, we're going to talk about Fallout 2, which has a lot of the flavor of Fallout 1, but is a different game.
For sure, yeah.
It was already changing. We're going to get into it, talk about it. We hope you stick around. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.